Welcome back to the tanning zone. Things are about to get interesting right now because we are taking leather out to finish. So first thing, let's get these sheep hides out and start rinsing them. All right, what do we have here? We have some scum and mold growing on the surface. Not a problem. This is a problem. I don't like that. With this little piece of hide floating there, you can see it's already a little bit different color. That's not great. That's the only real spot I see. I mean, there's a couple of edges floating, that's fine. It's just a lot for this container, so the, options to prevent that are basically, patrol it more and check it and add more liquor, but you can't just add water because that dilutes the liquor too much. I'm pretty sure these are done. I'm going to assume that they're done. We'll check them after they're rinsed a little bit, and I'm just going to right away get them into fresh water and start rinsing them. Got a nice clean tub here, a squirrel skin, and some pieces of turkey skin. This looks like a stomach. I don't think that's mine. I'm not sure where that came from. I think that's it. All right, because this is all ropey, it's like real slimy and stringy and weird. Actually, it's gotten a little bit better. Anyway, I don't want to reuse this liquor for anything, so I'm just going to dump that out. Just going to dump it out on this oak tree. I'm sure the oak tree will not mind at all and probably will get a bunch of benefit from this. Okay, so having two tubs like this will really help me in being able to just fill one tub while I'm rinsing in this one and then just switch them back and forth. This turkey skin, I'm just going to kind of massage it open a little bit. It's very stiff and contracted, and the astringency of the tan has like sucked it down really tight. So I want to get that stretched out. There's also a lot of tissue on here that normally would have been fleshed off, but clearly I just took this and probably didn't flesh it at all and just threw it straight into the tan. And that stuff has probably been a year or two. I don't even remember where this came from. Just sitting in that tan, like that's how much this preserves hides. In fact, let me show you something here. This is a wad of goat skins. I had a bunch of goat skins at one point, and I decided one day when I was feeling good to tan a bunch of them. And I started tanning them, and like that's right around when my girlfriend left, and I was like having a hard time, super depressed, super sick all the time, like hardly had any energy, and basically I just ended up flaking out on these hides. And they ended up soaking in a bucket like this in the tan or after they came out of some tan, and I just let them dry up in there. And this is them. They've been outside, mostly on the ground, for probably 6 to 8 years. This is the power of tannic acid combined with a skin protein. Like, this is not going anywhere. If I threw this on the ground over there, it would probably still be there in 50 years. Amazing preservative quality. But it makes a great sample. And, again, I'm basically just going to keep leaving this out. Just as an example, if I can have that around for another 10 or 20 years, it's a good demonstration. So there's a shipwreck. I think it was over 300 years old. It's the Metacaterina. You can look it up online. And it was carrying a cargo of Russian leather, which is bark tanned. Well, it's vegetable tan with something, but it's also treated with birch tar. And they dug this leather up out of the bottom of the ocean in this shipwreck and finished it out, and restored it and made stuff. You can still buy items made from this leather. So here's where we're at with these now. If I slosh them around like this, you can see we're starting to get some color in the water. And, I want to rinse that stuff out. Like, I want to rinse out the unbound tannin and coloring matter and whatever's in there. I just want to get down as much as possible to the tanned skin fiber. Make sure there's no dirt on here that's splattered up here, or if someone else used the beam, that it could be contaminated with something, which happened before. Okay, we have the neck upward here. Let's make a little cut in the neck just to test it. Again, I'm basically assuming that these are all tanned and more than tanned. You may see that there's a lighter coloration in the center of the skin relative to the outside of the skin, but that's definitely tanned. And It's just a little bit darker towards the outsides, but you know, it's definitely colored all the way through. I don't know what to tell you about judging that. If in doubt, you can just put it back to make sure, you know, and add liquor as needed. And then once you gain kind of more of an understanding of what to look for, you can start to scale back, you know, backwards. But it's not going to hurt to kind of over tan the skin as long as the solution is strong enough to preserve it. Anything that is left on the skin now that it's tanned is going to come off a lot easier. You'll also notice that when I scrape the skin, you can see it drying out. I mean, when I say drying out, I don't mean literally totally dry. I mean, it's really letting go of moisture easily because the skin fibers that normally interact with water in a way that makes your skin kind of, you know, fresh and rubbery and able to resist environmental forces that might damage your skin are denatured now. And they don't function the same way they did. They don't interact with water in the same way that they did. So I'm going to be real systematic here. You can see very easily now it's going down to just a real fine, clean skin fiber, and we're getting off like a little skim of stuff that's coming off. Again, extra easy now that it's tanned. Everything's like changed now. And that's why I said in an earlier video that you can sometimes use the tannin as a tool to help you get this stuff off, because it doesn't always come off easily, especially on, say, like a cattle hide. It can be difficult. So you can actually sort of just plan it that way where you're getting most of it off, like whatever kind of comes off easy, which is my general approach, and then anything left after the tanning process or during the tanning process, like, you know, a couple of days into the tanning process, this will usually do this because this outside surface is already tanned. In this case, I just didn't have any good reason to take the hides out and work them over. If you're trying to tan your hides extra fast, if they seem like they're shrinking up a lot, it's definitely not a bad idea and often a good idea to take them out during the process. So after like a week or a few days or something in the tannin, I'll take the skin out, work over the flesh side, and then put it back in the tannin, because it takes away that astringency that the hide has kind of like shrunk the skin in and locked it up, right? So that kind of prevents liquid from moving through the hide. It makes it tan slower. So like if I'm doing a class that I want done in 5 to 7 days, which I've done a couple of times, I'll have the hides ready to go. They just need to be delimed and then we start tanning. But several times a day, I have the students take the hides out, scrape them over, move a bunch of the liquid out, get them opened up, and then put them back in, and the tannins are just going to go in there much easier. And I also have them, you know, come by and stretch on the hides all day long. And we can get the tanning part done in like 4 days on goat skins. And if there's a lot of this stuff, that's another reason you might want to, you know, tan the hide for just a couple of days and then pull it out and get more of this stuff off and then put it back so the tannin can penetrate better and tan the skin more evenly. I think with these sheep skins, they're just such a loose fibered skin, and I was kind of like moving them around a lot. They just didn't seem like they needed it. And also, they really are pretty clean already from all that scudding and flushing. But you can see we're getting quite a bit of stuff off of there still. And this is going to leave the surface very, very smooth and nice. I'm not pushing hard, but you know, I have my tool at a certain sharpness that works really well. And again, there's a lot more technique to what I'm doing than it looks like. So I'd like to get all these flesh sides gone over and get them into fresh water, try to agitate them a little bit to get water pumping in and out of the skin fiber to remove anything that's soluble, basically. If it's soluble, let's get rid of it. So I'll see you on the other side of scraping this hide. So we can see now this is even smoother than it was. If I didn't go over this side again, it would turn out okay, but it'd just be a little bit more fluffy. There are other things you can do to take that off, like sanding with pumice or other things. As it is, just that one last scudding really did a lot to make this side beautiful. And one thing you'll see a lot on amateur hides is that this side will have all kinds of tissue and gunk and little curly cues all over it. And I want to make sure that at some point, either now or soon, to just be sure that this skin is, you know, well soaked up, it's all stretched out, and that it fills back up with this clean water. Okay, one down, more to go. Let me get this beam rinsed off and cleaned for the next one. Now, I did make a hole in that skin just because there was one little bit of that tissue that I was scraping off, got on the end of the side of the hide, just like in a little spot. And I just scraped over it too many times, so it forms like a bump, and it kind of cut through the flesh side of the skin. So I'm going to need to be careful of that. Also, this beam surface being so rough and crappy is causing me problems. I still haven't located, you know, the piece of what I want to make a beam out of. At some point, I'll just use something less than ideal and make one anyway. So I'm done with number 2 here, and I just wanted to point out that it's very light. Again, this is because the proteins that normally interact with water to make skin the way it is have been, I don't know what, destroyed, denatured, blocked with tannin. I'm not really sure how it works, but you can see that by the color of this, that the water leaves really easy. Now, a lot of the water is still in there, but quite a bit of it has left with just a single scraping, versus earlier when the skin was untanned, you know, I could keep going over it and it just would stay like heavier and rubberier. Make sure it's soaked up well. Let's take a look at the cattle hide. We're going to throw this up on the beam. Take a slice off it to see how it's tanning. It's tanning very nicely. This solution, it smells really good. It smells like, I don't know, kombucha, vinegar, some kind of fermented fruit. Honestly, it smells really good, like almost like you could drink it, but I'm not gonna try it. Anyway, it's very healthy. There's a lot of sediment in here, so it's a little bit difficult to tell how strong it is, but I think it's still pretty, yeah, I think there's still some stuff in there. Well, let's see how it's doing. So it actually feels tanned. Yeah, look at that, it's gorgeous. This is one of the most satisfying crafts. You will find out if you do it, just when things start to really come together like this. Man, that's tough. I mean, this knife's a little dull. Okay, well, there you go right there. It is not finished. There's about a 1/16 of an inch core at this corner that's not finished. This corner is extremely dense, because the hide really varies in different parts. Okay, so as you can see here, this line is wider. The hide is probably about the same thickness, but it's a much denser section of the hide. So it has a while to go. Let's take a look at the other end. I think is probably actually finished or close. You know, this corner is actually quite thick as well. I'll just pick a thin area just for demonstration purposes here. And that is finished. Nice even color all the way through. Looks good. Okay, so my options are to strengthen that liquor and just continue to tan it in there and leave it. There's nothing wrong with that. Or I could layer it, which means I'm going to put in some bark on the bottom, lay the hide in, and basically kind of fold the hide in with bark, shredded bark, fresh shredded, you know, full tannin bark that hasn't been used at all, in between every layer of skin. And then we would pour that back over it and then leave it. And I kind of like that option because I can just leave it for a few months. It'll definitely be done when I take it out. It's very safe. I don't have to maintain it. I don't have to cook more bark. So it will use a little bit more bark, but I like that option. So that's probably what we're gonna do. I'll think about that while I finish these sheep hides. Also, this is nice. You know, this still has some tannin going in it too, so that'll be good to pour over that if we do layer it like that. Sheep hide number 4. And finally we have these random pieces of turkey skin, which I think I probably was just skinning a wild turkey and was like, hey, I'll take some of the skin and throw it in the tanning solution and see what happens. Now these were not fleshed at all, I can tell. They have, you know, probably half the thickness is just tissue that we don't want. Well, more than that. Well, that's just ripping apart. So I don't know. I don't know if this part that I just peeled off is really all there is for leather and this is all fleshy stuff, or if I just divided the, yeah, that's just fleshy stuff. So all there really is for leather is just thin, very thin piece of skin right here. I don't think I'll be making any turkey skin coats or anything. It's full of holes where the feathers were. See that? See all the color in that I just dumped out? That's all stuff that washed out. Okay, fill that up with fresh water. We're just gonna kind of rinse back and forth in some fresh water, lots of sloshing, some soaking time. So while that's filling, let's start layering that cattle hide up in this tub. I have a bunch of bark chopped, but is it enough? Well, if it isn't, I have another tub full. Okay, this is how this is gonna go. We're gonna put in a layer. Now that hide is mostly tan, so I'm not gonna need a lot of bark. So we're gonna do an inch or less. So we're gonna lay this in on the bottom, right? So the entire part that is on the bottom of the tub is contacting just bark. So we'll add bark here, enough that I basically can't see the hide. And I'm gonna lay this over that, so no part of the skin is touching another part of the skin. There's always bark in between. Now you can do this in a smaller tub if you have a larger hide. You can make it work. Just anywhere that it's folded, like if it's folded up the sides and back, as well as accordion folded like this, just make sure you keep stuffing bark in there. So again, the rule is the hide is not touching another part of the hide. There's always bark in between. And I can't tell you how much bark you should use. I mean, I'm just guessing myself. Plus, I'm not familiar with whatever you're using. Species, condition, how much you cut it. One account I read, they talked about using different sizes of bark cut, you know, for different stages. So if the hide was tanned only this way and not started in a solution like I did, then you would leave it in for so many months or whatever and then take it all out and relayer it with fresh bark. Think this is full of bark? Yes. Well, I'd prefer to put some kind of weight on there. Whatever that is, it can't have a lot of iron in it. Even bricks may have too much iron. They could stain the hides or darken the color. Almost any rock should be suspect, like, you know, putting it on the hide, because you don't really know how it might stain the skin. Okay, before I go look for a weight, I'm just gonna slosh these around for about a minute. Just really make sure they're well soaked up, and water again is flowing, moving, pumping through that skin fiber. I just scrounged up some old tiles here. I'm not really worried about these having any kind of, you know, mineral that's going to leach out and affect the skin. If there's any, it's going to be very minimal. Look at that. Really, this is just to help keep everything from floating when I add the liquor, because that dry bark's going to want to float. It might lift the hide up a little bit. And just to keep everything, yeah, like tidy and weighted down in there. This is going to continue to seep down into that bark, be absorbed. I don't want this level too low. Like in another tanning video I did, I left it for so long that it actually evaporated enough that the hide was exposed. And I don't want that to happen. But this is actually dropping pretty rapidly because, again, all that liquid is slowly seeping into those folds of the hide. It's absorbing into the bark. And we may actually have to add some water or liquor. And we'll know more about that in a few minutes. We're also going to kind of slosh it around a little to get out any air bubbles and make sure the liquor gets under there. But it's still bubbling on its own. You can see if I push on it, some bubbles come up the sides. And this is kind of stabilized, it looks like. I'm just going to pump it up and down a little bit. You can see a few bubbles coming out there, but it looks pretty good. So I think that's okay. I definitely want to check this again tonight and tomorrow morning to make sure that as this bark soaks up more water, which I'm sure it's going to, this level doesn't drop too much. The amount of hide in there that's untanned is really not that much, but now that that is in the center of the skin and not on the outsides, tanning just slows way down. So it takes a long time to get that smaller amount of tannin into the skin to finish it off. So we just want to make sure that this stays strong enough that there is an adequate amount of tannin. This one, basically, this was the wool on hide that I basically just stuffed into a big container of bark liquor. Didn't touch it for a couple of months or something, and it just didn't work out. There was tons of flesh on the flesh side. It didn't really tan quickly. And when I was fleshing it, I could really tell that the flesh side here is definitely weakened. A bunch of the corners like ripped off and stuff like that. So it's definitely compromised, but it's far from useless. Like for instance, I could see making a tool roll out of this, you know, with pockets for different carving tools or something. You roll it up, tie it with something. I use those all the time, so they're pretty cool. There's some grain damage on this side that's pretty obvious and pretty obviously weak, but it'll make something, and it's, you know, it's finished. It also has a lot of modeling in different colors on here. So this one I'm definitely going to dye black. I think we should do that today, right now. Let's not, because as soon as I start handling that stuff and getting the iron on my hands, getting it anywhere near here or on me, the other hides could potentially touch it and they'll turn black wherever or dark wherever that iron solution gets on them. So I think that'll have to wait till another time. Okay, so these have been through a bunch of rinse, you know, changes of rinse water and agitation. There's still going to be color coming out. That's okay. You're not going to get rid of all of it, and you don't need to. But I think it's time to move on to finishing. So we're going to make what's called a fat liquor. That's why I have the blender and a jar of egg yolks. Now this is a lot of egg yolks. I wouldn't need this many, but I have so many frozen egg yolks in the fridge that I kind of want to use some of them up. So once in a while I'll find like a nest of eggs outside that the chickens have laid, and I don't really know how old they are, so I don't want to eat them. Things like that, and that's where these came from. So like even a dozen egg yolks would be pretty good for what we're going to do here today. Now the thing is, the eggs contain their own oils and lubricants that can condition the skin, but they are also an emulsifier. So they will allow us to dissolve oil in water, and that's why it's called a fat liquor. So what we're going to do is essentially make mayonnaise. We're going to add oil to the egg yolks while they're blending, and that's going to emulsify the oil and allow it to be suspended in water. Now think of the advantages of this. So if I take a piece of leather and I just smear oil on it, you know, trying to lubricate the skin fiber, that oil has to soak in and then, you know, creep around the hide and creep into the fibers and try to like lubricate the skin evenly, which is not really going to do, especially without any kind of agitation. This allows us to suspend that oil in water so that as the water passes through the skin, it will, you know, leave oil on the entire skin, all like throughout the fiber structure. Now fat liquoring is something that you more commonly do with skins that you want to be soft. I'm using an oil that is liquid at room temperature, olive oil. This is old rancid olive oil. Rancidity does not seem to matter at all. I've used super rancid oil to condition hides. The byproducts of rancidity might actually have, you know, value as tanning agents. So I just want to give this a little time to make sure the oil I've put in there is emulsified well. You know, that might take a minute. So let's run this for about another minute. Okay, now I want to check this water. This water comes out of a black pipe that's coiled up in the sun, so it can actually get very hot, and it wouldn't surprise me if it got hot enough to cook the egg yolk, and I don't really want that. It'll kind of curdle. I do want it hot though. Like, I want a good warm solution because it'll work a lot faster on the hides. So this hose has cooler water in it. I'm just going to make sure that this doesn't get too hot. Just nice and warm is good. Blend up the rest of those egg yolks, maybe with a little more oil. Again, this is kind of overkill on the egg yolks, but egg yolks do have really nice conditioning oils in them. You can use them as a substitute for brains and brain tanning, which is just what it sounds like if you're not familiar. So again, by using this much egg yolk, we're getting a lot of those nice oils that are in the eggs as well. Kind of forgot about that for a minute. I don't want to use too much water for this. So I'll be adding a little oil to the grain side at the very least as we go along, so we don't need to overdo it here. That was an awful lot of oil and eggs. Nice and warm. Squeeze these out a little bit. Now, if I had a way to do it easily, I'd probably remove some more water from these by wringing them, or, you know, you could put them on the beam and scrape some of the water out before putting them in here, but I don't think it's really necessary. Okay, so I don't think I've talked about this yet, but I'm gonna go for like a very softened, supple type of a leather with this, and that's because these sheep hides just want to be like that. Look at this, like, loose, it's real loose and floppy type of skin. It's got all these wrinkles on it. So we're going to make a wrinkly surfaced, you know, really accentuate those wrinkles on the surface. Very pliable, supple type of a leather. So I'm using these, you know, light oils that are liquid at room temperature, which is one way you can lean towards getting that type of a hide. Put our squirrel in there too. And we really want to slosh these around a lot. First of all, to make sure that they're very well soaked up, that this fat liquor is getting all over them. So I'll be doing this for the next hour, just coming by and kind of moving them around a bit, making sure that they're getting agitated and that water's moving through the fiber structure. Now you can imagine that if the skin was completely dry or mostly dry, how all this nice, rich, fatty liquor would just go right into the fiber structure, which is pretty ideal. What we're probably going to do is hang these up and dry them, and then by tomorrow afternoon or evening we can put them back in here dry, and they will do exactly that. And in the meantime, we're going to hang them up with all this in them without like wringing them out or anything, and that stuff's going to kind of dry and into the skin. Now this surface has gotten darker over all this rinsing and stuff. And there could be a lot of different reasons for that. It's probably just a change in chemistry. It's been exposed to oxygen, right? Over and over again. I keep exposing it to oxygen. Before it was like soaking underneath this liquor all the time. The water itself that I'm rinsing with, my spring water, has a chemistry of its own. It contains calcium and magnesium and probably other minerals for sure. Maybe in quantity though, and it certainly contains, you know, it's not a really hard water with like a lot of calcium, but you know, if I boil water in a pot two or three times, it'll get a pretty good covering of deposited, you know, minerals. You know, just a shift in pH from rinsing the hides from the pH of the actual water, you know, the water's chemistry itself. So there's all kinds of reasons that could happen, but it's sort of lost that brightness that it had. Okay, so I'm going to leave those here, and again, over the next hour, I'm just going to come back and manipulate them a little bit, and then we'll hang them up to dry overnight. Okay, so I think this is probably pretty much stabilized. I just got a little more air bubbles out of there. Yeah. But, you know, I think it's safe to just sort of leave this the way it is. I think I'm just going to add a little bit of water to this because I'm probably going to leave that and ignore it for months because I'm always busy. I'm always procrastinating on doing this stuff, and I'll be like, oh, that hide's probably done, but just to be sure, just so I don't have to deal with it right now. So as long as I feel like it's safe in here, you know, I'm likely to flake out for a long time. But I certainly should check it every once in a while just to make sure that moisture level is staying up and that the water doesn't drop so far that it exposes the hide to air at all. Nice. They feel nice and buttery now. So these have been in here for about 30-45 minutes. Moved them around a couple times. I think they're fine, especially since I'm planning to put them back in here tomorrow once they're either dry or most of the way dry. I don't think that's necessarily necessary, but I want to take advantage of this really nice solution I have right here and throw some in. I may grab some other hides that are laying around that have never been finished, just tanned hides that are dried out, and also throw them in here. But for now, let's just hang these up. I'm just going to leave all this liquor in and on the hides. So it dries in. All these tubs here are full of salted skins from dating back to over 10 years ago, some of them. They need to be gone through and tanned or thrown out. That's probably a good stopping point for this video, and next time we'll get into finishing the lubrication of these hides and finishing them out into finished, ready to go soft leather.